As promised, we are now joined by Electricity and Energy Minister, who has been voted South Africa's Person of the Year for keeping the country load shedding free. Earlier today, he had a briefing where he warned us that the power remains a likelihood. The Minister joins us in studio. Minister, very good evening to you. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening, Bravo. Thanks for the invitation, and good evening to the viewers at home.
Well, they say don't praise a fish for swimming, you know. But we have to say, congratulations on a job well done so far.
I guess it's a great testament to the men and women at Eskom. They've gone through a very torrid time. The kind of difficulties that they've gone through, exceptionally acute. A lot of them were accused of corruption, incompetence, nepotism, and therefore their patriotism was called into question. And I think it's important that the men and women are the ones who made it possible. The kind of turnaround that we are seeing is not as a result of external factors, but principally as a result of the commitment of men and women at Eskom, starting from the board, the management, and the average worker at the various power stations, including those who provide support services, ancillary services. So I think it took, if you like, the whole of Eskom to get to where we at. Of course, the nature of awards and recognition is that you recognize an individual, but I guess that this is really a recognition to the efforts of the men and women at Eskom. Of course, there's a face of that delivery. I happen to be that face. Of course, the opposite is also true. When we went through the highest intensity of load shedding, the most number of days load shedding, the most number of hours, significant erosion to the Eskom revenue streams. Of course, I was the face of that. So we are saying to the country that I think we know what we are doing. We're executing against the plan, the Energy Action Plan. And in Eskom, we had the Generation Recovery Plan. A vision was there, management was put into place, and we are all transfixed in resolving this question. And I'm not about to suggest to you or the country that we are out of the woods, but we are within touching distance. We are on the right path. And in fact, ahead of the curve. We never thought that would be where we're at now, but because of the exceptional effort of the men and women who are here. So we have to say thank you to the work that they've been doing. You are absolutely correct in saying that you don't congratulate a fish for swimming. But I think the point to be made is that we have a recognition of where we're at about a year ago. And I think we must celebrate every little milestone that we have achieved there. But of course, the end goal is to achieve energy security for the country.
Take us a few steps back, if you will, to when the president first approached you about what it was that he wanted you to do, and of course the marching orders that he would have given you.
Well, of course, the conversation would have ordinarily happened before the president will make the decision. And the conversation was about, look, we are confronted with an existential question. I want to assign someone just the sole responsibility of taking leadership of the resolution of this question. I want to have a direct sight of the interventions that we are making. And the best way of doing that is to appoint an executive authority, and in his own calculation, he felt that I possessed the skills to do that. And of course, I've worked with the president. My immediate past responsibility before that assignment, I was heading the Infrastructure and Investment Office in the presidency. So I had some degree of appreciation of some of the challenges that they are facing the electricity sector. But also I think my background helped, because as an engineer, of course, not an electrical engineer, not a mechanical engineer or chemical engineer, but it's all within that family of engineering. So I think the basic tenets, if you like, the foundational principles are the same. So had that conversation, and the president said, look, we already have the Energy Action Plan, which was a comprehensive response to the load shedding question. It was co-authored led by government, of course. Private sector was at the table, labor was at the table, community was at the table. So it was some manifestation of social compacting. So they've agreed on these 5 priorities. and he asked that I want to execute. And of course, you know that the Eskom board was then replenished, I think in October of the same year, 2022. The EA Energy Action Plan was introduced around July, and it says, look, take that leadership. And of course, I mean, the rest is history. I think it's important first, lessons to be learned there is that there has to be a plan, and then there has to be vertical alignment. So from the president, the executive authority, the board, and also the management team. So and then it had clear objectives and timelines. So that was in place. And the next thing was what are the kind of skills that are required to execute against this plan. So from an executive authority point of view, the president was of the opinion that you need someone with some technical disposition, orientation of engineering, having run infrastructure projects of this magnitude. And in his calculation, I was the candidate. And then what we then did from an Eskom point of view was to articulate what we call the generation recovery plan. So the EAF Energy Action Plan had 5 outcomes. The first one was to fix Eskom. So in fixing Eskom, the board then resolved that, look, we need the generation recovery plan. So that was in place. That recovery plan said we needed resources for us to be able to fix this fleet. But then you can't go and just fix everything within the Eskom camp. So they identified 6 priority power stations. Those 6, they were arrived at in the following manner. On the aggregate level, so collectively, they were responsible for 70% of the losses. So essentially, they were principally complicit in the load shedding issue. So we need to place particular attention at this power station. And these are the kind of parameters we want to achieve. We want to reduce the losses by X percentage. So it was Duva, Matla, Kriel, Kendal, Tutuka, and Kusile was also in that basket. And then once we get there, it was the next question, what about this power station? Yes, 70% of the losses, what are the features of the failures here? Boiler tube leaks, I think, were one of the big issues. Ash handling was one of the big issues. Emissions were some of the big issues. Then we asked the question, do we have the skills to respond to this? And then we were able to look within Eskom, outside this power station, but within the Eskom domain, and then identify the kind of skills that are required to go into that space. And then the next thing was that the morale was down. I think the employees, the 42,000 plus, were devastated. I mean, they were told at every turn they are corrupt, incompetent, they are not deserving of their position. So, I mean, they were despondent about the future. So the next thing was to affirm the employees. As to say at the leadership level, we think that you are the right people to help to resolve this question. To put that into context, I mean, let's go back 2001. Eskom was voted the best electricity provider in the whole world by the Financial Times. So we're able to trump organization in the industrialized North Europe. China was very far from even the consideration. Of course, they've made a quantum leap. Some of their SOEs in the energy and electricity sector are one of the best. But Eskom trumped all of those. So you can't suddenly just become the worst performer. There's something fundamentally wrong, and that had little to do with the skills, but everything to do with the leadership question and how you are able to affirm employees. And then introduced a set of incentives. This is now at the management level now, led by Mr. Kasim, who led the transition, and now Mr. Dan Marokani, the group chief executive officer, Mr. Nxumalo, the head of generation, to say at the station level, there are incentives that will be associated with performance. And then you find that there's interstation competition, and in fact, the edge to perform comes from within without necessarily cutting the corners. And then the last one was to pursue those, the few elements that were sought to help and on undermining, if you like, the progress that we are making. They were soiling everything that the Eskom stands for, diametrically opposed to the values of Eskom. So thieving, malfeasance and leakage, very few, but they were spoiling the bag. So it was important that we were able to isolate them. You can see the number of cases, the number of prosecutions, And that's the kind of journey that we have traveled. So just the last point.
What though about the employees of Eskom kind of derailed, you know, the train? Well, it's a very interesting aspect. Was, of course, I mean, credit has been going to you, has been going to the board and the executives. But what about the people who were there and who are still there, who have now also contributed to this turnaround?
Oh, it's an excellent question, and I'm sure at the right time we'll be able to elaborate it in the most comprehensive fashion. But these are some of the features. So you find that because of the lack of trust and just the assumption that everyone at Eskom is stealing, was to concentrate that power, if you like, at the head office, when in fact the rubber hits the road at the station level. So those delegations were recalled. So if you needed spares, you needed to go to a head office. So you can imagine the amount of time that it takes. So agility was eroded. And of course, if you needed to do the kind of planning, forward planning, the kind of equipment that I need, the kind of spares that are required for me to prepare for the next outage, you find that the decisions gets to be delayed at the head office level.
Was it malicious? Was it not meant to, you know, close the gaps around corruption and the like, but had the opposite effect of holding the organization back?
Well, my view is that you must construct, if you like, an organization and all the system, the value chain for procurement in this instance, in the manner that allows you the best opportunity to identify leakage and in fact undermine it even before it can happen. So over concentration and not decentralizing, I think has got the opposite effect we have seen at Eskom. It's a huge organization, so the kind of procurement, it happens not just on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. So if you had to wait for someone to make a decision somewhere there in Megawatt Park, I mean, it just undermines your ability to execute. And at every turn, you have to justify yourselves why you are taking the kind of route that you are taking. I'm of the view, Bravo, that failure is acceptable. The only type of failure that is not acceptable is a catastrophic failure. So invariably, when you act, when you do, you are likely going to make mistakes. And those, you can tell, are genuine mistakes, because those who make mistakes are those who are doing. I mean, if you had to fold my arm and do nothing, I'm guaranteed not to make a mistake. But these are genuine people, honest people who have been able to maintain the kind of performance that we have seen over the years. They don't suddenly become incompetent. And for you to address malfeasance and incompetence, I don't think that centralizing helps you when you are running an organization the size of Eskom. So what the employees chose to do is just fine. Head office will make decisions at the time that they think they ought to be making those decisions, and delayed decisions undermine the performance of these units. To recover them, it takes an inordinate amount of time. And that's what led to the kind of degradation that we had seen. And of course, like I said, then that also gave opportunities to these elements that wanted to undermine the work that we've been doing to occupy the space. And the more honest people just pulled back and watched. And that's why when you came back, you needed to reassert, if you like, the centrality of the employees in the resolution of what I characterize as an existential problem. Because, I mean, if you look at what the South African Reserve Bank had to say about load shedding, National Treasury had to say about load shedding, and some of the reputable financing houses had to say, it had the effect of contracting the South African economy. It's a structural constraint. So if we're not going to stem the intensity of load shedding, I think it would have decimated the country's economy. Yes, we are recovering, we are on the right path there, but we are not where we want to be.
If you've just joined us, we're in conversation with the Minister of Energy, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa. 272 days without load shedding. But is this going to stay? We're going to talk about the future next to stay. Now, you warned this morning, earlier today, saying we can't rest on our laurels. What would rest on our laurels mean for you on the back of everything that has been achieved up until now?
Well, first is that the immediate end goal is to ensure that we we end load shedding. So we see the back of load shedding. I think one of the gross injustices that has been committed is to introduce in the vocabulary of average South African something called load shedding, just for us to get accustomed to the fact that there will be hours in the day that we're not going to have electricity. I mean, this is a great injustice for a country that is the most industrialized on the African continent. There is no country that is able to grow its economy when the lights are off. But the point where I was registering today, that it's important that we are able to take account of every little milestone in our journey to achieve, if you like, the short-term objective. So the fact that if we have 272 days of uninterrupted supply of electricity is significant. I mean, today marks the best performance from the generations side in the past 5 years. But is that an achievement? No, but it's just a confirmation that we are on the right path. The only time that we'll be able to call it is when the following things are in place. So we have generated significant or sufficient amount of runway to do the following. The first one is to absorb any kind of cluster of units failing. And we have seen that in the immediate past we have had incidents of units failing, clusters of units failing. But because we have created sufficient headroom, we're able to absorb that without necessarily resorting to denying people their right to electricity, what you and I refer to as load shedding. And the second one is to allow the South African economy to grow. So what we know is that as a result of this sustained supply, sentiment is positive. So the business sector is looking at additional investment in the South African economy. Capacity utilization is likely going to grow. So that's going to place a significant pressure on the generation side, because we are going to see an increase in demand. So if you look at the recent projection by some of the most reputable institutions, so let's take the more bullish of this institution, the Bureau of Economic Research, Stellenbosch. It makes the point that if government were to continue with the reforms that we have been experiencing, led by through the program called Operation Vulindlela, which is co-sponsored by the Presidency and National Treasury, the country's economy might grow by up to 3.5 percentage points, that is GDP, by 2027. So you need to have a sufficient generating capacity to support the kind of growth that you are envisaging.
But are you going to be able to do that if your candles, your matlas do not perform according to their capabilities, for all the reasons you've outlined?
Part of the account, the balance sheet I was providing today was those 6 power stations. Almost all of them have graduated out of that crisis mode. So Matla is one of our best performing power stations. Before the incident that occurred, Kusile has graduated out of that because we have retained Unit 1, 2, and 3. Matimba, Matla, like I said, Nduva has also improved. So there's only 2 power stations that gives us a sleepless night. This Anode, but if you look at the total generation capacity, is one of the oldest, and therefore the generation capacity is significantly lower relative to the others. But we still have a matrix to measure, and we are not doing well against that. And then if you look at the Kendall, we are not where we want to be. The improvement is only 3%. The rest is 35% and above. So our view is that anything 50% plus is in the right path. So if you look at those power stations, we are on the right track. And then if you take stock of what's going to come on stream now, we are going to return Medupi number 4, so it should come around March of next year. We are retaining Kubek unit number 2. So you remember that what we are doing, we're refueling it. The steam generator has been closed. We are starting it 930 megawatts. By early January, we'll get the benefit of that. It's part of our intention of long-term operation. We want to extend the life of Kubek unit number 2 by another 20 years. We have succeeded with unit number 1, so we'll get that 930 megawatts in January. And then we are firing Kusile unit number 6. I think what should not be lost on us is that Kusile is still a construction site, so we expect that Kusile unit number 6 and 800 megawatts will come on stream by February of next year. So if you look at the totality of this, just from the Eskom fleet, I have not yet accounted from on the private sector side, there's 2,500 megawatts that are coming on stream. So we're bullish about what is possible going forward. We want to achieve an EAF of 65%, at least when we measure it instantaneously at the end of financial year. We're now at 62.5. So if you bring Kubek unit number 2 and also Medupi unit number 4 will be very close to that. And by the end of next year, calendar year, we want to get to 70% EAF. We're confident about us achieving those numbers. And it's a kind of EAF or performance of the generation fleet that is going to help us to support the economic growth of the country at 2.5 to 3 percentage points.
I do actually want to tease out a couple of the issues you've touched on in the real time that we still have left. But there's something you mentioned about the importance of ensuring that people are not denied their right to electricity. Today, colleagues went out to Dobsonville, right, where they were promised, residents tell us that their electricity would be restored before Christmas. But as things stand, that hasn't happened. Whether it's stolen transformers, or transformers that simply do not work. The net effect of that is that those people are, in fact, denied that opportunity, you're saying they shouldn't be denied.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. So I keep on making the point. I mean, for an average person, let's take those residents, Dobsonville. Yesterday, I learned of a community in Cinderella Park in Msunduzi. Whatever the reasons. So there are periods in the day where they don't have electricity. So when I say that 272 days of no load shedding, they can't relate to that statement. You can call it by any name. Load shedding, load reduction. There are periods in the day where they don't have electricity. And that's why I make the point that the next frontier is to attack, if you like, the distribution side, which is a downstream problem. We have resolved the bigger problem, which is aggregate generation relative to demand. So we've been able to ensure that there's more generation than demand. That's why we're doing away with load shedding. But that is surface new problem. Lack of investment in the distribution and reticulation infrastructure, such as transformers and substation. The issues around
also grid capacity issues.
Yes, because they have to do in many areas with the kind of load that is placed on those distribution infrastructure as a result of what we refer to as non-technical losses in engineering terms. In township parlance, we call it the illegal connection. Just the other day, we were able to show 2.1 million people are bypassing the system. That has got both the impact on the revenue of Eskom, as we have seen in the numbers. It erodes 23 billion rands on the bottom line. And then on the technical side, putting a lot of pressure on the distribution infrastructure. And that's why we'll be working with municipalities to address this situation. But just on the Dobsonville community, I spoke to Eskom, and the commitment they'd given was that they'll make sure that the transformer is replaced by tomorrow. By the way, it's not just the only community. There's many, many other communities, and others don't necessarily have the voice of those that are close to Eskom facilities who can mount a protest of that nature. So we want to ensure that we address that working with municipalities. I did say that I'll announce an intervention, a comprehensive intervention of how we are going to deal with the capacity of municipalities to deliver, including Eskom, and also the ability to collect. Eskom owed 95 billion by municipalities put together, but municipalities also in turn are owed over 347 billion by customers. So it's important that we address the whole as opposed to just isolating particular events. But I think those events do surface the extent of the problem, and they need to be attended to as and when they surface.
Well, of course, you're dealing with all these Eskom issues and challenges. We still have to talk. I mean, you want the renewables brought, into the system as rapidly and as quickly as possible. There's also the role of nuclear that you've had to put some brakes on because of all these issues of accountability and the like. Going into the next year especially, what exactly are we looking at?
No, absolutely correct. So I spoke about that 2,500 megawatts coming from Kubek unit number 2, Kusile 6, and also Medupi 4. and then there's new generation capacity. So the whole conversation we've been having, the focus was on Eskom, because Eskom is the supplier of last resort. So today I announced a bid 7 successful bidders on solar PV. So we have seen this insatiable appetite by the market, 10.5 gigawatts. So if you like 10,500 megawatts of submissions that were made. So that talks to, if you like, the appetite of private sector to participate on the back also of the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act. So you can see it has liberalized, if you like, the generation side. So
but with grid issues, some can't.
Now, yes, and you are absolutely correct. So what undermines and constrains our ability to be able to successfully onboard this is issues of the grid, especially in the Cape areas. And that's why I did say today we'll be announcing a pilot on the what we call the independent transmission program. So essentially saying to market forces, we want to concession a line. So that's not privatizing, it's concessioning. Ownership is still of the state. The transmission is a natural monopoly, so we're not going to give it away. So it's important that we find bespoke financing solutions that makes it possible for us to onboard if you like, renewable energy sources. But the last point we made is that the greater the penetration of renewable resources, the greater the risk to the grid. So it's important that we have guardrails, protection mechanisms to ensure that it doesn't undermine the efficient performance of the grid. We have learned from other countries that have gone this route that we have to be focused on protecting the grid because of the intermittent nature of these solutions. I mean, let's look at Gauteng. For the past 3-4 days, we have had inclement weather, so you are not benefiting during the day from solar PV. We should be getting 8,000 megawatts. We are not getting that 8,000 megawatts. And then when the sun comes out, then suddenly it's available, and then you must absorb it. So you can see the oscillations, and it can undermine the stability of the grid. And that's why base load is important. No one relinquish their ability to exploit their natural endowments. What are those endowments? Coal is part of our endowments. We don't have a coal problem in the country. We've got an emission problem. And the technology has shown, and this is commercialized in Japan. I just returned. They are co-firing their coal-fired power station with ammonia. Is able to bring down the degradation in the air quality, is bringing down the CO2 levels. So technology exists that allows you to exploit your natural endowments. And then we also accept that you need to move with speed to accommodate the renewables. So it's not a binary question of one technology over the other. It's all of the above, but the mix and the balance must be such that energy, electricity is available and affordable for everyone.
We can't, of course, end this conversation without talking about Eskom's 36% tariff application. Oh, yeah. We heard from especially the poor talking about what that is going to do. And one wonders whether at cabinet level, for example, we are having any deep and wide conversations about this particular matter.
It's a valid point, Voyo. So, I mean, even now, before the tariff increase, there's many households that are watching us today, those who can afford to replenish their units, that simply can't afford. So what's the situation? If you look at the poor in particular, you have the most progressive of the social wage. So you give on the one side the pension 2,190, on the other side you are taking it in the form of utility. So it's important that we respond to that question. We know that priority number 2 of the 7th administration, fighting poverty and reducing the cost of living. I want to use this platform to repeat the following. You will not see a 36% tariff increase. Those conversations are happening. It's an independent NERSA process. I'm confident you won't see that scale because we are committed to ensure that we reduce the cost of living. So we'll not get those proportions of increase. The second one is to accelerate our ability to ensure that free basic electricity get to the right people. As I speak to you, there are communities, households that qualify, but they are not getting that benefit because the grant dispensation, Treasury makes the money available, gets to be given to the municipalities, but it doesn't get to be passed through to the deserving consumers because they don't have a robust indigent policy. So when we exploit the technology platforms, you roll out the smart meters, we are able to front load you at the beginning of the month remotely. The money doesn't have to go through a third party. The second issue that is associated with the free basic electricity was introduced in 2001, 50 kilowatt hour. I mean, consumption, living standards, and in fact, attitudes of people have changed, so we need to increase that. Our view is that it should be increased to about anything between 150 kilowatts to 200 kilowatts. The only computation we are doing is what is the cost associated with that, because it's not truly free, because someone is carrying the can, subsidizing the poor, and of course it's your national treasury, and it's only treasury that can make that determination. We'll simply advocate for that, but I think that consistent with our commitment to ensuring that we are able to address the affordability of electricity, we'll find one another. The last one is to use the various technology solutions, solar PV, battery storage, hybridization of those offerings is going to help us to bring down the cost of electricity. We are not fully exploiting our natural endowments. And I think if you had to do an irradiation atlas, the quality of the sun, the Northern Cape in the top 3, only rivaled by Chile and the Australian outback. The rest of the country better than all of Europe, whether it's the Northwest, it's Limpopo. So it's important that we are able to exploit that. We are doing 2 pilots in the Venda area. We'll unveil them early in the year. You will see that the intervention suggests that we can bring down the unit cost of connection by 2/3. And that means that we can connect the 2.1 million people that are not households that are not connected to the grid. And the 7th administration will truly achieve what we call universal access. There will not be energy poverty. It will be available. It will be affordable because we are sitting with those endowments.
Well, let me not detain you any further. I'm sure, it was a busy year. You're dying to go and do your dance moves before the year actually ends. We look forward to many of those videos of you dancing. Thank you very much, Minister of Electricity, after what has been a very good year for him, including, of course, being voted South Africa's Person of the Year for keeping the country load shedding free.